But I think the thing that people often forget is it's very painful. It is a physically painful disease. And I would really love to see the stigma reduced because of where it is in such sensitive areas.
Hello, I'm Eric Zudak, and on behalf of Tolokan Research Innovations, I would like to welcome Portia Combo, who has graciously offered to share her perspective about living day to day with hidradenitis suppurativa. Portia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Even today, many people, most people, I would say, have not heard of HS. And when I
Mhm.
when I mention hidradenitis suppurativa, people say, "What are you talking
Yeah.
about?" But if I'm understanding correctly, that this has been a part of your life for a long time,
Yes.
and you were aware of the condition before you were actually diagnosed. Is
Mhm.
that right?
As far as HS itself, I did not know like its technical name, but I have been living with this for since I was 16, 15, 16. I'm 34 now. So it's been with me longer than it hasn't, you know. Um it's a I think it's part of my daily life. I often kind of forget that because I have dealt with it for so long and you just learn how to adapt, you know? Um, but I think the thing that people often forget is it's very painful. It is a physically painful disease. And I would really love to see the stigma reduced because of where it is in such sensitive areas. It really kind of scares people, it freaks them out. Even I can go to a doctor's office and try to explain it to them, and they'll either try to tell me I'm wrong and crazy, or they're just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I would love to see more education. I would love to see the stigmas reduced for people. And so I really believe in your all's mission and what you've got going on.
Well, thank you. That's really good to hear. If so, can I ask you, how long would you say it took to get a proper diagnosis?
That, and there's a lot of other people that I know that have had this same experience. So it took me roughly uh 13 years. We went from, if you want me to tell you the history,
Yeah,
um,
please.
the first diagnosis was staph infection. And I was in high school and I was just really confused on how I got staph and who I got it from. And I kind of lived with that for a long time. And then I saw another doctor brought it up, and she said it was folliculitis. She said a lot of people with curly hair tend to get it. When you shave, the hair grows, curls back. And she was like, just don't shave. And I was like, okay. And that actually did help a little. And then it was actually my youngest brother. He had gone to a dermatologist with my mom, and the doctor had diagnosed it as HS. She was just like, oh yeah, that's HS, like clear cut case. And then like my mom was like, I think you need to go. I think this is the same thing that you obviously have. And I went, and within 5 minutes, she was like, yes, you definitely have HS. And then that opened up a lot of doors to where I could research it more and find out, diet is a huge part for me. It's hormonal, it's mainly triggered by food. So it's really helped me getting a proper diagnosis to learn how to live with it a lot more better and to make it more manageable, even without medication on a daily basis.
So were there some treatments that you pursued with these other diagnoses that sort of were obviously probably weren't effective with the the staph or the
Mhm.
folliculitis? Were you researching that? And
So
yeah.
the staff was the worst, obviously, and it was especially stressful. I've told Reagan this story, but my youngest brother, the one that has Down syndrome and HS, he had open heart surgery at 18 months old, which was around the same time that I was diagnosed as staph. So there was that extra precaution and that fearfulness that, oh my gosh, I'm going to give this to my little brother somehow. We're in the same house. And so that was in itself a whole different thing. But then also, I became allergic to certain antibiotics because I was put on antibiotics so much. So now I have allergies I didn't have before, spent hundreds of dollars. It's been really difficult.
No, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
And if I remember, so you did consider participating in a clinical study, but
Yeah.
for reasons it didn't work out.
Mhm.
What was that experience like, and sort of what were the roadblocks or what were the things that prevented your participation?
Probably kind of a economic thing. I live in rural Kentucky. Well, I'm from rural Kentucky. Now I live in a slightly larger city. I work in a small town. I am in manufacturing, so I'm a daily grind, 6:15 to 3:15 every day. And I had wanted to do this study through my dermatologist, but unfortunately, my job was not the kind where I could get off for that all the time. And so that kind of set me back. And it was really frustrating because I know that there's probably other people like me who, are in these situations where they live in small town America and, you have to have a job. So,
Yeah, so it was primarily just a scheduling,
mhm.
a economic
Yeah,
obstacle, and that sort of thing. It's pretty great to hear that that was even available in the part of the country that you're in,
yeah,
given that it's rural. And dermatologists, there is a shortage of dermatologists in general, right? So that's encouraging to hear that
it
there was
is.
a study nearby,
Yeah.
Um, so you mentioned that this is, a part of your daily life. So looking at, what they call in research the burden of disease, how would you say that affects like your physical activity every day?
I definitely feel it on a daily basis. I have stage 2 in my right armpit. And so in the summer, whenever it's like hot, if those spots get irritated and then I sweat, it's very painful. But also in between the thighs is one of my worst areas. And I have a few that actually will kind of constantly leak so there's that, and then also just the friction of walking. And I walk on average 8 miles a day just at work. Yeah. So, but that's what I was talking about, where you just learn to deal with it and mask it. And I know that there's people out there who cannot work because of this disease, and my heart, I feel for them.
What would you say if in just in general, people who are maybe not familiar with HS, doctors, that is, healthcare providers, what is something that you think they would benefit from knowing about HS?
So I have heard a lot of people who, once again, being in this area of the country, we have a pretty big epidemic, but a lot of people have been accused of like being pill pushers or doctor shoppers because they're possibly seeking out pain management, and doctors are like, no, you don't need anything for this. I've never had to go that route, but I have known several people who have. I also would really like to see kind of the push away from antibiotics. That's really kind of a common treatment, is that you're just given antibiotic and that's it. They're not talking to us about, lifestyle changes. I've known a lot of people who went on a GLP-1 to help lose weight and it reduced their symptoms. There's a lot of things I think that people can be taught and educated on, especially as far as inflammation and, our diets go. And that really was never brought up to me. I had to learn that on my own. And then I kind of deep dove into all of this stuff. Reagan was a big help with that. And it's worked out really well.
Wow, that's very helpful, really, really. And so I'm sure this changes, but kind of, yeah, it's a little bit redundant, but when you say it's something in your daily life, so is it, how present is that? Is it changed? Does it kind of come and go a little bit, or?
So for me, I have definitely um, seen an increase into stage 2 in most of my spots. I usually just call them boils spots.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not, I think mine was a little weight related. I had gained weight and then I noticed that they got really bad. And then I've recently lost quite a bit of weight and I have not seen a decrease in this round. So I'm not going to
Mhm.
say that that's what it is, but knowing my trigger foods now helps to eliminate that a lot. getting out of the shower and having to use Hibiclens or a special wash on them that adds time in the shower. You have to doctor them and bandage them. It's just it's like taking care of this other little thing that you really don't want to, but you kind of have to.
It's really important context, and offline I'll talk to you about it. I've seen some exhibits at some of the conferences and things, and that really helped understand sort of what the experience is like, for the person who's dealing with it. Um, so as far as you mentioned sort of stigma and that sort of thing, I mean, is that, can you characterize, sort of what, how that has changed over time from before you knew or that your actual diagnosis to, to where you are today, where you're sort of learning to manage symptoms and doing your own research on that aspect?
Yeah, I absolutely can. I feel like as I've gotten older and I've kind of lived with it, and I've accepted it's not going away, and I'm probably going to have these scars forever. There's parts of me that just kind of want to hide my body, and because people see it and they're curious, or they think maybe it's contagious. There's a lot of people in my support group that have had people break up with them. They think, oh no, people think that it's an STD. That happens a lot, and it really makes you want to close yourself off, because you just got this unsightly thing, and that's what they are. They're not pretty. And people, they really do kind of look at you differently, or even if they're not judging, they still tend to stare. And so I find myself, like I said, wanting to be more modest, but at the same time, I'm like, this isn't something that I had any say over. This is me, this is who I am. And I feel like it's kind of helped me, free myself a little bit more. But also, I feel like I talk about it a lot, especially at work. And I love talking about it because the more that I can be open about it, and the more I educate myself and learn, the correct facts about this disease, the more that people are like, "Oh, okay, that's not, that's not what they thought it was. I'm not a leper. You're not going to catch it." It is still a little nerve-wracking. Like when I went to my OBGYN appointment, I was like, "This is what I have. Are you familiar with it?" And then I was like, I can be self-conscious of my legs, so just give me a second to warm up to you. But everything's great there. So,
Oh, good. Yeah, I think, in some, just in again, this is all, basically from listening to presentations.
mhm.
Um, I remember I think in Florence at the European HS Foundation meeting, one of the presenters was, really leaning into the counsel to the other physicians to sort of that this is not related to hygiene. It is not related to, it isn't a lack of effort on the part of the person. It is an autoimmune disease.
Mhm.
And that's, that is how it should be approached and treated. And so it does bring to mind, what you're talking about. Even in the medical community, there are people who are not,
Yeah.
sort of debate.
I've had that same fear. I've had that same fear of, oh, do people think I don't shower? Do they think I don't know how to clean myself? And you just want to scream, I promise I know how to bathe, but you can't. So I understand that completely, completely. And if anything, I feel like most people with HS are actually very clean because you kind of have to be, so it's kind of funny.
Right, your life kind of revolves around right.
Yeah.
Uh, so in terms of work, I know you said, in one sense, your job and schedule was an obstacle to participating in clinical studies. What other, sort of, what is the impact on the working life of HS, across the board?
I feel like the people that I know were all kind of in different sectors of work. I will say the people I know that have it who have more physically active jobs, such as mine, it is really painful. I've missed time because of it. I've missed, wages. And another thing that's a really big issue I see for a lot of people is that doctors are hesitant to grant them FMLA because of this, but that would actually really help people because you could get the intermittent FMLA, depending on your state. And there's some days it's literally as simple as this sometimes. There's some days I've ate too many peppers or tomatoes with dinner because that's my favorite. Those are some of my trigger foods. And you can wake up the next day with a golf ball in your leg, in your armpit. It rubs on your bra. There's been days I'm like, I don't want to wear a bra today, but I have to. This sucks. And that is one of the most difficult things is I wish that people kind of realized we're not making this up, and it's not debilitating in the sense that, you know, I'm handicapped or need special treatment, but there are some days I really don't even feel like walking through the plant, but I have to. And that's one of the biggest challenges is I really do wish that doctors would grant people more FMLA for those reasons instead of just denying it.
It's an interesting. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. One thing that I kick around a lot, or I spend a lot of time thinking about, is in assessment of these diseases in research. It's generally focused on the morphology, on the appearance, on in the case of HS, on the number of lesions and distinct lesions and tunnels. And so that is how they really assess the disease and evaluate treatment. And it sounds like the pain is actually considerably more of a factor. That is the limiter on the day-to-day life. And so kind of aligning the patient's experience with kind of the drug response, right? So if something not necessarily like a pain medication, but an autoimmune medication were to reduce the pain and maybe not improve the appearance as much, that would be attractive to you. Yeah, I mean the pain
Absolutely.
is
Because we know with HS, there is the tunneling. And so I have had some in the past where you could only see a small part of it on the surface, and it might have been really dark or really red, but then underneath, it's pushing into, the layers of my skin, and it's really painful. And then, especially in the inner thighs, it can make those swell up. I've had some where, I literally looked like I had a softball under my thigh. I do not miss those days.
the appearance doesn't necessarily correlate to the sensation, right? So
Right.
the look of it doesn't necessarily indicate how much or little painful it is. Is that
I think with some people, I feel like when you guys see mine, I think you would definitely be like, oh no, those do look painful. But especially the people in the armpits, I feel like that's kind of a hidden gem because it's hollow, in there, and they tend to grow up into that hollowness. And if you've ever seen someone have to have a debriefing of that skin, those people, I can't even imagine how much pain that has to be to get to that point. Oh, no. Yeah, it's very painful.
have you had anything intervened on, like with draining
Oh,
or an
yeah.
injection? Yeah.
hmm I've had to have several lanced, mostly just lancing. I had to have one that was about 2 knuckles deep, actually, right before Christmas, that had to be lanced, and we had to wound pack that for about 2 weeks. Yeah. And it was in, of course, the most awkward place ever. So that's how they usually go.
And so, okay, so kind of back to work, kind of wrapping that up. So you said you have had to, miss days. Does that kind of eat up all your sick days? And then when you're sick, you
Yeah,
just,
it has. It absolutely has. It has ate all my sick time, emergency vacation days. And then at my job, we have a point system, and I've just had to take points before because I was like, this is not a day that I can do this. My job can be slightly stressful for me. And obviously, we believe that HS also feeds off of stress. And yes, there have been days and I'm just like, this is not even worth it. I don't care.
I feel for you. And again, I really appreciate you sharing all this with us. It's really fascinating. So it sounds like you have a doctor now who is you're working with, or that someone who does understand the disease and how did it take you a while to find that person, or
My dermatologist that diagnosed me, it was actually another dermatologist at this office. She has since moved on. I do see the head dermatologist. I don't see him very often. I have been pretty good about being able to kind of keep mine at bay, but I do have like a backup of doxycycline if I ever need it. I really try not to take it unless it's just, and um, but I don't see him on a regular basis because he did kind of push the doxy. He wanted me on doxy every day. And I wasn't a fan of that. My gut health kind of started getting destroyed, which I think is also tied into HS. So, like I said, I just use it as a backup now if I need it, like absolutely need it. But I do have, all my charts on file with him. So if I needed to make an appointment, I could, no problems. It's not something that I regularly have to go right now.
And so you with getting healthcare, you don't always feel like your concerns or your opinion are being taken into account, or that you're being listened to. Is that fair to say then?
I do feel like that's fair, especially if it is not a dermatologist. If I'm just going to a family doctor, or let's say it's after hours and I have had spots that needed to go be looked at and I had to go to a fast pace. Those walk-in clinics are the world's worst about not understanding it. And then as soon as they hear you say my dermatologist, it's usually shut the door, go see your dermatologist. So that's almost always what has happened to me lately is they're just like, no, go see your dermatologist. Well, it's really hard to get a dermatologist around here. As you said, there's not a lot of dermatologists. So you're looking at a usually 3 to 4 week wait, which isn't going to help me now.
Is there any telehealth that you're aware of that HS, have you ever experienced anything like that? Have you ever had like an appointment with a dermatologist online?
I've not done dermatologist online. No, I have used telehealth before with other providers, but not for my dermatologist.
So, I mean, it really sounds like, what the next kind of thing we were going to chat about, you've really explained a lot about developing your own disease management strategy. And, have you sort of codified that? Do you have a kind of a checklist or something that you put together for yourself in terms of, these various protocols that you've created?
For the most part, yes. I know all of my trigger foods. And like I said, some of them are my very favorite, and it's not even the carbs. So I kind of allow myself like one meal a week. If I'm doing okay, I can cook with onions this day, or I can put peppers in this dish. As far as that, I've shied away from a lot of milk products. I was not really a big dairy person. I've cut out cheese almost completely. That was a huge trigger for me. Um, I'm not a huge soda drinker. I did see a decrease whenever I did used to drink sodas a lot. I've seen a decrease. Water is my best friend. I feel like it helps flush out the system and keeps the HS at bay. And so yeah, mostly for me it's food. Um, Sweating does tend to be kind of a trigger. Shaving is definitely a trigger for me. It's not for everybody, but it is for me. So I usually use beard trimmers like on the armpits, and then call it a day. Bikini area often gets, beard trimmers, things like that. So those are kind of my foolproof methods, and they've done okay. They've done pretty well.
So, other than handfuls of pain medication, what helps you get through these flare-ups or the days where you're just over it?
Lots and lots of hot showers. Lots of hot showers, lots of rest. If they tend to go down faster, if I get more rest, if I don't push my body, I've had to cancel a lot of plans before because I'm like, hey, I can't make it out. Like a lot of my friends are yoga teachers. I love going to yoga classes, but there's a lot of classes that I've had to be like, I'm sorry, I can't make it. Just keep the money. I don't care. Just because I knew one wrong move and I'm getting blood and pus everywhere and I'm going to be hurting and then nobody's going to understand.
If someone, were just newly diagnosed with HS, what would you, what advice would you, recommendations, how would you start?
So, I actually kind of have this happen a lot. I have a lot of people who, when I tell them about it, they're like, oh, that sounds just like what I have. So there's actually three people that I have gotten in my personal life to go get correctly diagnosed. And I do mostly tell people, you're going to really have to watch what you eat. And I really feel like that's one of the biggest triggers for most people. And I believe most people, in the HS community would agree with me. I do usually tell them, like, stop shaving really sensitive areas with a razor. If you have to use a razor, like, use the sharpest one that you can. You want to reduce that friction. Um, be careful with tight clothing. I tell them, be careful with this style of underwear. These are more comfortable. You're gonna not, seams are not your friend. But mostly it's the food that I talk about. And, I tell people you need to look up a lot of anti-inflammation recipes. You need to be searching for foods that are anti-inflammatory and see if you start seeing a difference. I do that especially because, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of everyone being on antibiotics for this. And I feel like if we can make changes in our life to prevent progression, but also prevent us from having to be on an antibiotic forever, let's do that. Let's do what we can. But I'm also, if somebody needs westernized medicine, I'm absolutely for that. There's been a lot of things like Humira, like I said, the GLP-1s, people have had a lot of success with that. So some people are going to need that. I'm not saying that I won't be in that boat someday. I very well could be, but I like to try to maintain it right now while I have the power, and I can, with doing those little changes every day.
Well, it sounds like you are kind of doing a lot for awareness as
Yeah.
well, even if it's one person at a time.
Yep.
I think, it took a couple of years for me to become aware of how common it is actually.
Yes.
And I was, just always assumed it was a rare disease. And I think just most recent conference in Lithuania, one of the doctors, a European doctor, said, "Oh no, it's not uncommon. In fact, it's very common. I think it's just not, as in your early experience, it's not called that, right? It's
Yep.
not called that. It's I get boils."
Yeah.
So what else do you think would be the benefits of, and how, what would help to, increase the awareness and of HS in the community and in the public?
I would say it's gonna have to start with doctors. This is really hard to tell people to do this. Just talking more openly about it. That's been my experience. Is I'll tell people exactly what it is. I shy away from frightening terminology. And people are then like, "Oh my gosh, I totally have had those. I know exactly what you're talking about." And like you are totally right. It is so common, but people also know it as different names, as, acne inversa is what it was called for years. But then again, when have you ever heard of acne inversa? Even that was rare. So, I think really getting doctors more educated, and having a better understanding of that would help if we can eliminate, misdiagnosis and the times in between that, that would be great for people.
So really just getting to diagnosis, would be the biggest benefit of that, right?
And for people, like, not getting tossed around between, see this specialist, go here, go there, because that does tend to happen for people. And, it's kind of a long waiting list sometimes to get to this proper diagnosis. And then it's just kind of like, okay, well, you can take this and you can do this, and that's kind of your options right now.
Yeah, and I think that especially among general practitioners, which, these people are relied on in a lot of these studies, because there's only so many providers, there's only so many patients, and there's a lot of studies happening right now.
Mhm.
And so I see that people are using non-dermatologists in these, which, just removes them one degree from being aware of HS in the first place.
Mhm.
That's I think something that uh, we're not directly involved in, but we we would like to help with that as well.
Especially like you said, when you go to the general, family doctors, or you go into a clinic and they look at it and they're like, do we need dermatologist? Do we need infectious disease control? I've had people ask me, talk about that before. People get really scared to even want to touch it. The one that I had lanced, I mean, it was like tears streaming down my face. I can't, like, I can barely move. I could barely walk. And I think that lady probably was like, okay, we have to do something. But I've had other ones that I went in and I said, hey, I really want this lanced. This is what it is. This is what I have. These are my doctors, blah, blah, blah. It's after hours. And they're like, no, I don't feel comfortable touching that. Just go see your dermatologist. So
If you can give me an idea, so you talked about you were 17, 16, emotionally, physically, and all of that. So how has, knowing what the diagnosis was changed your outlook, your self-perception, your self-image, those things that kind of explain where, when it's just mysterious and then you learn what it is, and then you kind of take these steps on your own behalf, to strategize a treatment. What is that arc like?
I have a lot of thoughts about that. So I also have obsessive compulsive disorder. And so for me, one of my biggest triggers is contamination. So now I have this disease where there's pus and blood. So emotionally for me, it's really stressful sometimes because even though logically I know I'm not going to give this to someone, there's still the fear like, let me wipe the toilet seat off, let me do this, let me do that. Yeah, that happens to me a lot. And then also just the depression. A lot of people with HS, I think the depression gets kind of underlooked because it does tend to make you really depressed. You're missing out on social events. You're so self-conscious of showing your body. Being that 16, 17-year-old girl in Kentucky in the summer, I should have been swimsuits, jumping into creeks, having all this fun stuff, but I was so scared because I didn't want to be judged. I hated my body. I've been through lots of periods in my life where I literally hated my body. I hated looking at the HS. I couldn't stand it. It's really frustrating. And sometimes I still get that way. I do still grapple with, I hate this. This is so unfair. Why me? But then I just remind myself you have 10 fingers, 10 toes, two arms, two legs. There's a lot you can be grateful for, and I still give myself space that this could potentially get worse. I don't ever know what the future is going to bring, but I just try to take it one day at a time and not get really overwhelmed and not allow myself to slide into that grief or that anger that we probably all feel because it's just kind of like this is the hand that we were dealt. You can't help it. You really can't control it. Once you have it, you're probably not getting rid of it, and you just kind of have to put your best foot forward.
So how are you feeling, or what's your sort of prediction or prognosis for, this getting better? So in other words, for new treatments, new approaches, new information. You've created your own kind of strategies, but are you looking to the future and maybe drug development or other investigative efforts to solve some of these problems? You have optimism?
I do have optimism. I have a lot of optimism because I feel like just in the last few years alone, there's been so many new treatments that I'm reading about or that people have talked about. I do still I'm kind of 50-50 on the, skin debriefing. I've heard people say they had great success with it. They loved it. They would do it again. I've had other people say it never healed. There's people walking around with, open sores in their body that they'll never get rid of. So that's really scary. And especially because I do have it in my right armpit and it is stage 2, I fear, am I going to get to stage 3? What is that going to look like for me? What's going to happen? How did I get here? But I would definitely be open to, new medications that's coming out. I feel like it's something that doctors should talk with that person on an individual basis and come up with the best plan for them. Because things that I don't like being on, somebody else might not have any problem with. So it's got to be a personalized strategy.
Right. And are you involved in any, do you have any, you talk to other folks? I mean, other than at work, it sounds like you have a little bit of a support group there. Are you involved? Do you go to any kind of events or support groups or anything like that? Are you aware of those?
I've actually looked. There's nothing where I live. But actually the support group that I talk about is actually online. So it's a very large support group. It's really great because it's the epitome of we listen, we don't judge. There's people who will show all parts of their body and people are just zoned in on that HS. It's great. We give each other tips and advice, and there's a lot of people who try certain creams, and bleach baths are really popular among people. And then it also does become a place to vent when, like I said, you see a lot of people who said, I got dumped, my boyfriend or girlfriend didn't want to be intimate with me, a doctor in the ER sent me home, I'm in so much pain. That happens a lot. So it is really nice. It's kind of a fine line because if I stay in there too much, then I get a little depressed because I'm like, great, you know. But there are days when I've gone home and I'm like, nobody else will understand this but you guys, so it is nice. It's really nice. And I feel like I've learned so much from that support group just on like tips alone. So they're kind of my community.
This is, really, really helpful and generous of you to, to share this information and this experience with us. I think, I'm really excited to kind of put this together and look at kind of what you said, because really you had a lot of really interesting insights. I don't know if you have any questions for me. I don't know what they would be, but if you do, I'd be happy to answer them. I am not a doctor or a scientist. We work strictly on basically technology to support disease assessment, is what we do. But we do have a lot of, attend a lot of conferences. I'll tell you that.
Well, actually, so after the first initial interview with me, Paul, and Reagan, I went and looked up Tolokan and the group, and I'm actually really excited to learn more about Llama, the lesion area mapping app, correct? So
Mhm.
that's kind of what this whole thing will go through, and I think that sounds really amazing, and I'm like really excited about that actually.
One of the areas that we think it actually does help. It's strictly experiential, right? But is, the can you tell us, just sort of walk us through when you're being assessed? So you're being assessed for Hurley or you're just being, you're having, I mean, how, what does that bring up? What are those feelings like when you have to do a full body, assessment?
In my experience, it was not a full body assessment. It was, let me see what you got, and literally like, yeah, that's what that is. Um, that's kind of been what it is. As far as getting like certain boils treated, they tend to look, is it swollen? Does it have a fever? Is the redness getting bigger? But as we know with HS, that's not always gonna happen. Sometimes it's gonna go underneath. And so that's really frustrating, but you know.
In the assessment process, there is start with the left, like let's say you start with the left axilla, between the breasts,
Mhm.
groin, and you work your way through the whole assessment. But for a patient, that's a pretty tedious process, right? And so one of the things we hope the llama will do is to speed that process up in a clinical study so that, because it is uncomfortable. And I'm sure that if you're
Yeah.
in pain, holding your arm up for an extended period of time is not a lot of fun.
All right. It's in the most sensitive areas of your body, under the breast, in between the thigh, in between the buttocks. And that's, I can imagine, having to go through those assessments constantly, that would be, a whole different ride.
Thank you again for doing this and for prioritizing this. I know the last thing you want to do after work is more work. But so thank you, and until next time, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you. It's nice to meet you.
You too.